Alright, so this is it, people. We've finally reached the point of no return with your jazz guitar skills. If you've been following the channel, you may know that we're gonna now start diving deep into the body component specifically, and then eventually the mind component. I'm gonna be talking primarily about all the things that you actually practice that will, in my opinion, efficiently improve your jazz guitar skills, assuming you put in the consistent work with it. And understand that that's still a big if. The only way that you'll know this for sure is if you just do what I say. But until then, you'll just have to trust me. But I'm telling you, all this stuff works, especially with a lot of the body work that I'll be getting into over the next bunch of several videos. Just a quick disclaimer. This video today is really only just the beginning of this topic, and I'm really only talking about one primary thing today, although it turned out long, and I was kind of introducing the whole topic in the beginning, but make sure you stick around to the end because I do say some valuable things about what to practice here all throughout, so if you stick around, I really appreciate it and enjoy. In my opinion, this stuff is so legit, and when I say legit, it's not like I came up with all this stuff and the stuff that I come up with is the best stuff. Like, this could be a lot of stuff that I've gotten from other people. I'm just kind of organizing it into stuff that I find really works. And like I said, this stuff is so legit that if you actually do what I say, when you start getting results, you probably want to say to me, Derek, why the hell didn't you start with this stuff? I could have been making some serious guitar gains or whatever the last 6 months or so, but instead, you hit us with all these, conceptual rambles. What's up with that? In all seriousness though, this stuff is really very beneficial, so I urge you, please, for your own sake, do not sleep on this stuff. Trust me. If you're not already practicing in any sort of similar ways that are kind of like what you're about to see in the next course of videos, I guarantee you will see significant improvement in no time if you consistently do these things. Alright, so before I go any further, let me just do my intro. My name is Derek Plavin, welcome to episode 54, and if this is the first video you've ever seen on this channel before, I would recommend that you go back to the beginning and try as best as you can to go in order. A lot of the videos are really long, but if you want to benefit the most, that's what I would do, because this is like a free online jazz guitar course that unfolds in a logical sort of manner and keeps building upon itself. But if you like this video, go back and watch maybe the first 3 or 4, and then you can take it from there. And I also am available for private lessons and have a lot of available accompanying PDFs that go along with a lot of the videos on this channel that are available on my website and my Patreon. Now, like I said, I'm going to be discussing all things that I think are important for developing the body component specifically of the more complete mind-body-spirit model that I like to apply to a good amount of my practice, and that's for the organization and the clarity that it basically offers me. If you've already seen my early episode on this topic, then you may remember me saying these 2 important things that specifically pertain to the body component. One thing was that, in my opinion, when it comes to your actual practice and what you're literally playing on the guitar when you're practicing, I believe that the body component should generally be way out in front when it comes to your list of priorities, regardless of the fact that I still think that all 3 of the components, the mind, body, and spirit, are equally as important. The other thing was that, generally speaking, when I say working on the body, I basically mean working on technique, or working on your fluency when it comes to having things in the hands, and for guitar players, when I say body, that really means having it in the hands. So essentially, I'm implying that if you truly desire to make progress as a jazz guitarist as efficiently as possible, you should be practicing things that work on developing your technique in one way or another more than anything else that you do. Even if you've done these types of things before and your technique is currently excellent right now, it's still just as important because, simply put, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's just like going to the gym. Even if you plateau and stop progressing, you're at the very least always maintaining what you've achieved. Now, when I mention something like technique, I'm sure there's a lot of you who may initially think of things that are kind of like these repetitive exercises that are true exercises and not very musical at all. Or perhaps you may perceive them to be basic or boring or mechanical, etc. But I want you to realize now that although that stuff is certainly part of it, and these first couple of videos on this more general topic are going to be about just that, a big part of working on your technique also involves working on things that are actual music. And I'll be getting into that stuff afterwards, so don't worry, because that stuff is definitely fun. So, without further ado, let me take you on a trip back to the land of the beginner's mind, where we could freely open ourselves up to receiving valuable fundamental practice habits that we may otherwise often overlook or think that we're past this kind of work or something. Now, like I said before, I want to start this topic of what is basically technical or body work with the stuff that is more purely on the mechanical and exercisey side of things before the more musical stuff. And I'm estimating that this will take 2 more episodes after this one to get through all of that. So again, I think it's crucial to understand how important this stuff was and still is for my accelerated development overall. I legit do the stuff that I'm going to show you today and in the next few episodes significantly more than anything else that I practice, hands down. And I'm fairly certain it's one of the primary reasons, if not the #1 reason for my progress. Anyway, the only real thing that I'm going to be discussing today is basically just practicing chromatic scales. I'm sure most of us know what a chromatic scale is. If you don't, a chromatic scale just is a scale that includes all 12 notes within the octave that relates to our equal temperament system of music. And for practice purposes, we're playing them consistently ascending and descending within the scale from one note to the next. Now, the way that I mainly practice this chromatic scale, to me, is sort of similar to another popular kind of beginner exercise that is commonly referred to as the spider exercise. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of this before or have done this. It's something that I literally learned in my first real guitar lesson ever. And when you first do it, it may just be with all downstrokes, but even if I'm alternate picking it right now, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the strings, and then when you get up to the top, you just shift, right? And it just keeps going on. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of that before, and yes, I still haven't changed my strings. They sound awful right now. Now, although this spider exercise does have a lot of chromaticism in it, we still wouldn't consider it purely chromatic, and that of course is because when you're going between the notes between most pairs of adjacent strings, you're going a whole step, whole step, whole, and then of course the G to the B is a half step. But because of that, you wouldn't call this a true chromatic scale, obviously. So, obviously, when you practice an actual chromatic scale, you're not skipping over any notes, right? By practicing a true chromatic scale, I think that this adds a degree of musicality to what you're doing, as chromatic half-step voice leading usually sounds the smoothest to our ears. So check this out. Even if I'm playing the chromatic scale over something that has a lot of, changes and functional harmony, even if I'm not thinking about that stuff at all, and no matter where I start, if you just kind of stick to purely chromatic half-step moving motion, it just seems to work a lot of times and sounds good. Check this out. So for my practice, I use 2 different, shapes or positions or ranges, I suppose you could call it. Remember, you could technically say that the entire fretboard is really just one big chromatic scale if you almost looked at it like a scale diagram, the way you might see like different positions of a major scale like all combined into one, where you see like C major all over the neck, but instead the chromatic scale would just be like every single note. But obviously seeing the scale like that isn't really practical. But for me, I get a lot of benefit out of playing the chromatic scale on the guitar these two ways that I'm about to show you now. There's going to be a link in the description if anyone's interested in checking out. I made a PDF that has both of these ways that I play the chromatic scale written out. And of course, it'll be on my Patreon as well. The first way that I'm going to show you now is for sure the primary way that I practice this scale, and have been practicing for a lot longer than the second way that I'm going to show you after. I only added the second way much later, at least consistently, because I think that it happens to work on certain technical or mechanical things that the first way doesn't, as you'll see. This first way is also more related to the spider exercise, in my opinion, as it covers a much larger range of the guitar, and with the spider exercise you could take it up as far as you want, you know. This exercise doesn't cover the entire range of the guitar, but it's close, and I still think I get what I need from this exercise. So here it is. It's basically a continuation from how I started playing it before. And you're going to be playing things in a lot of groupings of, 4 notes with all the fingers at a time. So basically on the low E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. On the A string, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. D string, 7, 8, 9, 10, only one grouping. G string, 6, 7, 8, 9. Same thing on the B string, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Then last string, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And from there, I just go basically backwards. But if you know your fretboard, and you should, what the notes are, you should be able to figure out, how that works out for a chromatic scale. Now, for the range that I just played that scale within, from this low F to this high A flat, obviously that isn't the only fingering that I could have used exactly to get from that low note to that high note because of the nature of the guitar and a lot of the same notes in different places. But the way that I played it there just seemed to be a way that really made sense for me, and the way that I just settled into practicing it and getting familiar with it. Immediately we could see that with this exercise, at least compared to the spider exercise, we're more so working on developing our ability to really be able to shift positions accurately and in time, because you're playing a lot of 1, 2, 3, 4s twice on each string, so you gotta be always jumping like that. Now, for the second way that I play this scale, I do it in a way where I perfectly stay within a range of 2 octaves, from the lowest note to the highest note. And I also more so remain in one position, give or take, the way I play it here, because, well, I like to do this starting on a B, but, I start on the 7th fret of the low E string and end on the 7th fret of the high E string. So even though, as you'll see now, that I'm kind of shifting positions and jumping around, but I come back to it at the end. So this is the way that I would also play the scale, basically like this, from B to B, 2 octaves. Right? Now, for this one, in addition to being good for just getting yourself more and more familiar with playing a 2-octave chromatic scale that happens to generally stay in one position, this one is also good, in my opinion, for working on the specific mechanics of quickly going back and forth between 2 different strings, adjacent strings. So what I mean is, at the top end of this little fingering, I go and go right back. And it's not like the first one where when you're on the last string, you have time on it and you don't necessarily go back to the string underneath immediately. But to be able to play this smoothly, especially at faster tempos, and get that, with my practice, I've noticed that's not easy to do. That's why I work on it. So hopefully you can understand the different benefits of practicing this chromatic scale in these different kinds of ways. Now, Everything else that I'm going to say for the rest of this video applies to both of these exercises. First, I want to remind you that when I practice these, my intention is to do them with the Benson picking that I showed you in the last episode as best as I can. If you don't want to use this picking style, that's fine. But if you do, keep in mind that one of the things that you're really developing with these kinds of exercises is your skill level with a particular picking style. So even if you're not doing the Benson picking, if you consistently use whatever, style of picking you're going for when you do these exercises, you should get better and better at it. And for the Benson picking, I wouldn't say it works on so much the whole economy down, alternate up, because when you do these chromatic exercises, because you're grouping things in a lot of even numbers of notes, you really just have alternate picking in both directions inevitably, so you're not really working on that. But these exercises still definitely work on, things like the rest stroke and what you're actually doing, your touch, and just your overall comfortability and confidence with the hand position and the way it feels to you. Now, the thing that makes these different things that I practice work for me so efficiently is, like I always talk about, how exactly I'm practicing these things. I'm not going to go into detail for how exactly I program these different kinds of exercises in today's episode, but don't worry, it's coming. But for now, I'll say that it basically comes down to always starting from a place of comfort and progressing and doing reps from there. It's just like the way I broke down practicing the chord tones and half notes exercise in episode 23. What I will get into now, and hopefully wrap up this video with, is how we want to practice this in time and being able to figure out, where our comfort zone and particular range may be with this particular exercise so that it feels right and doable for us, but we're still making progress. First of all, understand that when I practice these chromatic scales, I'm only playing them in a duple or even sort of feel and rhythmic grouping of notes. I don't really play them as triplets or any other kind of odd subdivision, although practicing these consistently as triplets may be a good idea. So duple subdivisions would be rhythms like eighth notes, 16th notes, 32nd notes, and you can also practice quarter notes, half notes, and whole notes within this sort of duple, even rhythmic grouping as well if you wanted to or felt like you needed to as a starting point. Now, typically, eighth notes would be the first subdivision where you would start incorporating upstrokes into your melodic playing, but if you needed to practice this exercise as, say, quarter notes just to begin with to get comfortable, you could still play quarter notes with alternate picking just for practice sake. So, when you're working on technique, the bottom line is, if you want to really do it right, you can't separate technique from time. The whole idea with these exercises is to craft what you're doing basically with a ton of reps consistently so that over time you get it to the point where it's significantly improved as far as things like accuracy, feel, articulation, dynamics, tone, confidence, and just your overall fluidity with all this. When you play these chromatic scales fluently and eventually at faster and faster tempos, they really do start to feel great, and there's a true musical quality to what you're doing that you could really appreciate. But the truth is, if things aren't even and in time, then none of those things will even occur. So practicing with a metronome is absolutely essential. Of course, when you're initially familiarizing yourself with these shapes, or if, wherever your skill level is at, you feel like you really need to start at this point, of course you could practice things without the metronome at first. But just understand that eventually, if you really want to get the results that you're after, you're going to have to put in work with the metronome. So, if we're trying to practice these chromatic scales in time, and we know that we're only going to be using any sort of duple subdivision or rhythmic grouping, then if you're just starting out with this stuff, it's really all, like I said before, it's all about trying to figure out where exactly your comfort level is just to start with this sort of thing, and what sort of range of tempo do you feel comfortable within so that it feels doable at the low end where you can actually feel like it's easy to do it correctly and execute, but still able to progress within that range and get yourself to a higher end where it starts to feel tough and, where you're kind of plateauing. And, I think this is important because to me, this isn't really the kind of exercise, at least for me, where I feel like I need to practice this sort of thing every time I'm doing it with the different duple subdivisions, where I'm trying to work on, being better at playing different rhythms with something, or doing something like that. I really just think it's good to stick with whatever rhythmic subdivision you're comfortable with at the moment. And obviously with these, 30-second notes is really the last one, unless you're crazy and want to get into 64th notes. But, if you can get to where you're feeling comfortable doing this exercise with 30-second notes, which is how I do it, that's just where you'll keep it at for the rest of your guitar playing life. So to give you an idea of what I mean, even with the metronome clicking the same way every time, like if I have the metronome at 50 beats per minute, I could relate to that metronome with all those different duple subdivisions and practice the chromatic scale. So, if I wanted to do quarter notes, say I was going to call the click a quarter note, basically 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And I'll do that second pattern that I was showing you, right? Just as an example. I'm not going to play the whole thing here because it's slow, but you could relate to it as quarter notes. I could relate to it as eighth notes. 2, 3, 4. Right? Yes, I'll do the whole thing, forwards and backwards. You see how bad the string sounds there? Right? You want it to be accurate and feel good. Okay? Obviously, the next one would be 16ths. 2, 3, 4. Right? Okay, and then the last one, which would be 30-second notes. 2, 3, 4. Right? So, because you can play any one of those at a tempo like that on the metronome, you could see that you could practice within different ranges because, you don't need to put the metronome at super slow tempos, although I do start really slow, as you'll see in the next few videos. But, you don't need the click going up super fast because if you're playing with 30-second notes, I'm like topping out at like 100, 105, which you're never going to play that fast anyway with those 30-second notes. So, just something to keep in mind. So the thing to do really is to kind of even just start there, like 50, like what do you think is comfortable? Now, like I said, when I start with 30-second notes, I actually start slower, but you should be able to get a feel for which one feels comfortable and which one you can make progress within. And say you're practicing eighth notes, for example, and I say this to beginner students with practicing a lot of things. It's like, you can go past 120, but to me, 120 beats per minute is always a good goal marker mathematically, where if you can do, say, eighth notes at 120, then back it off to 60 BPM and now practice 16th notes and, building that up. And even though 16th notes at 60 beats per minute is the same as eighth notes at 120 beats per minute, they still feel differently, which is an interesting thing to note. So, basically, when you practice these things every day, you want to put in the reps and you want to do what you do like at a particular tempo and figure out what your interval is and increase it every time you do that. And like I said, I'm not going to go into the details of that now because this video is getting really long and, that'll be the focus of, the video after the next one, most likely. So, that's basically what you're doing, is you're always starting from a place of comfort where it feels extremely easy. And, even when I was playing that at 50 beats per minute before, even with something as slow as quarter notes, it doesn't have to start at 50. If I needed to start at 30 beats per minute because that's where it felt comfortable for me, and obnoxiously easy, as I always like to describe, then that's where you start and you build it from there, because you always want to start where you feel like you can get it accurate and then just small chunk it your way up every time. So like I said, I'm going to get into more detail with that in 2 episodes from now, but I hope that that makes sense. So when you practice these things, obviously over time with more and more reps, you'll start to realize what sounds good and what doesn't in terms of all the variables like the dynamics, articulation, how long the notes are ringing out, all that. So I could go into all that stuff, but I don't need to, because it's like I say, the real learning is in the reps. If you do the reps and do this stuff consistently over the time, as you'll see, that's how you'll figure out, how to do this stuff for real, all right? So I kind of, ramble a little bit there at the end, but I think I'm just going to leave it there. So if anyone has any comments or anything they want to say or any questions, just put it in the comment section. I'm here to help, obviously. And if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you gave it a like and consider becoming a subscriber, as well as a contributor to Patreon, where you get all the PDFs on this channel for $5 a month. And if you think anyone else would enjoy this channel, please share it with them as well. And I will see you guys now in episode 55.
Swinging and playing the blues. That's what we about.